an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Time of Contempt by Andrzej Sapkowski, Chapter 3. In this chapter, Geralt goes to a party with Yennefer, and he's just so not in his element, and so not having a good time, and so trying his best to be on his good behavior. And it's kind of precious, except for the fact that I hate everybody in this scene also. And I don't know why they're here. I have so many questions about this chapter. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Melanie for commissioning this episode. So, Melanie, I don't know if you're actually here, but I have to be honest about this chapter. I feel like I didn't know what was going on most of the time. There were a couple of moments that there were supposed to be like, that were written in such a way that I felt like there was supposed to be a reveal of like a surprise that I didn't get at all. Like, I went back and reread it. I tried, and I still don't know what the fuck he's talking about. So I don't know if that's me, if I'm not supposed to get it, but I think I was supposed to get it. I don't know. So yeah, there's so much to keep track of in this world, and I've been having a hard time, and this is not usually difficult for me. I'm usually like, it can be a challenge, but I manage it in the end. I just have to take my time. And whatever it is about this guy's writing, it is like almost impossible for me to do it consistently. There are times where I stop and I look at it and I can nail it down, but then there are times like this where I just really don't know what the fuck is going on. And so I'm doing my best. I really am, but I don't really understand why I'm having so much trouble. I don't know if I'm alone in this, if other people have run into this as well, if it's like the translation that's sort of getting me, because this wasn't written in English the first time, and maybe the translation is what makes it so tricky for me to follow. I don't know. And part of this I read, and part of this I listened to the audiobook, this chapter, because the audiobook, this one chapter is like an hour and 40 minutes. So I decided to do partial reading and partial listening. And there are a bunch of transitions from the present back into the past, which I have come to realize is just part of what can confuse me sometimes, because it doesn't feel like it's as obvious when it's the audiobook. I think when I'm reading, it's a whole other thing. But at the moment, it's, when I'm listening to it, you don't know that you're going back. And so it just feels like there's a conversation that starts in the middle with what I thought was the same person. And it turns out that it is not. It's, him talking about what went on when he was talking to somebody else later on to Yennefer. But yeah, so there's like the paragraph break in reading it that makes it a lot clearer. But there were some moments just with that where I started to be like, wait, okay. So we start off with Geralt, and he's at a sorcerer's banquet. And this is preceding a sorcerer's conclave, which is apparently, she's a member of the council, which is something that Triss sort of, I was going to say spoils. Like, it feels like Yennefer wasn't intending to tell Geralt that. She says something about how, like, Geralt, that they haven't had time to talk. That whole conversation I'll get to. But I can't help but wonder if Yennefer had just planned to keep this secret from him. And I have trouble with keeping track because there's a bunch of people in this that are all spying for different kings, mostly kings. I don't even think there's a queen yet. But also there's like the sorcerers themselves, I think, are all on the side of the royalty. Am I wrong? Or are they just like starting to take their matters into their own hands? Because they're all talking to Geralt about how he's going to have to choose what side he's on. And I'm frankly not sure what side that is. Like, it feels like they have started to realize that they don't really need the kings. Like, but the kings are also realizing that maybe I've been relying too much on sorcerers and I don't know what they're capable of without me even being in the picture. And maybe this is becoming dangerous for me. But I am not entirely sure when they want Geralt to take sides what that would look like. And I'm not convinced they even know. And the fact that they seem to expect Geralt to do that seems rooted in the fact that he is with Yennefer at all. I don't feel like they would all be... I don't even want to use the word antagonistic because that feels too overt. Everybody at this party kind of double speaks and means different things or means the opposite at times to what they're actually saying. And it's like obvious that everybody sort of feels that his involvement with Yennefer is, first of all, really puzzling in their eyes because most of them seem to think that Yennefer could do a lot better than him, that she's slumming it being with a Witcher. But then there are some of the other sorceresses who are looking at him and totally drooling over him at one point, which I found pretty amusing. I enjoy him being a little discomfited by it. Like it says something about how he was thankful for the alterations in his blood vessels that kept him from being actually even capable physically of blushing, because otherwise it would have been very embarrassing for him. I know that Geralt in the video game is supposed to be like really hot. Hot in terms of how video game characters are hot. But it hasn't been until now that I feel like we've seen the judgment of women at large of what he looks like. We have had Triss and Yennefer individually falling for him and being like fascinated by him. But that has, that could really come from something far more than just physical attractiveness, because they're both women with really special abilities. They're both women who are used to being in control of the situations that they're in at times, when they are rarely caught wrong-footed, and they are rarely confronted with somebody who has skill sets that they are not themselves familiar with. And so I was willing to really look at it as they could be enraptured by him simply because they are intrigued by the novelty, right? But once we see this, it's clear that there's a combination of things happening. It could be the novelty, but apparently this man is really, really fine. And I would have loved to get a bit more of this, if anything. I love the fact that one of them has to be like, you can't seduce him. That would be in such bad taste. And the other girl being like, yeah, I guess, but what if he initiated it? Then it would be okay, right? Like them all trying to come up with these loopholes for it. So the chapter begins with Geralt arriving at this banquet and realizing that shit is done very differently here. It is not a banquet in the sense that you sit down at a table with a bunch of people and dine with them and have a conversation over a meal, and there are people like walking around serving, but you are focused on the meal and you are kind of restricted to speaking to whomever you happen to be seated near. What this is a lot more like a cocktail party, and it's really, I keep comparing this mentally to what I imagine a party in Hollywood to be versus a dinner party at a friend's house. So you go to a friend's house and they're, they've made dinner, everybody sits down. But if you go to some place where everybody is here to network, there's a lot more concern with like putting on weight and what you look like. I feel like that is more accurate to what he's experiencing here, because it's just so, there is a real parade of who can wear like the most scandalous outfit and reveal the most skin. And these women are sort of like trying to get, it's almost like there's a combination of showing off for the sake of it, because they are all able to not only, like, it seems like the sorceresses are all beautiful, but they're also all able to put on glamours to make them even more beautiful. So it feels like they're competing in that sense. But it also seems like they're trying to use clothing that they know will be distracting to throw people off their balance as well. And so there is one woman, and I'm trying to find her name because she comes up to Yennefer first and is the one that's like sort of, they both are obviously not happy to see each other, and they also both put on a really good show of making it seem like they're delighted to see one another. But she is wearing like a totally transparent top and a dress that is, Sabrina, that's her name, and a dress that is slit all the way up to mid-hip on each side, when the fashion is really to like, maybe mid-thigh, usually to the knee. And there is another woman who has a similarly transparent top, but she has these like appliques that are strategically placed, because Sabrina, her nipples are just showing. They're just straight out there. This other woman is covering up a little. And then there's yet another woman who has strategically placed appliques, but also is like has enchanted those appliques to occasionally go transparent themselves and then return to, so it's like a kind of hypnotic in and out on those. And I gotta be honest, guys, this sounds pretty rad. Like, I would love to be able to enchant my clothing so that it did things like that. That sounds really cool. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The whole like vibe of this is just how important appearances are. Everything is about illusion. And I mean that in like every sense of the word. And yet, performing magic is sort of looked down upon here. There's a lot of like things that Yennefer cites as being faux pas, and I don't know, like, if it doesn't feel like, I feel like Yennefer should have sat down with Geralt before this event and given him some instruction and warning on what this was going to be like, because he is not in a good mood. Initially, like, okay, I'm going to describe this. First of all, he is really annoyed at the fact that they are supposed to be eating while they stand and walk around. Like, he, for his part, arrived very hungry, expecting dinner. And instead, there's lots of finger food. We've got a lot of like light seafood. We've got shrimp and caviar and things like this. This is a man who wanted a fucking meat and potatoes dinner. And now he's being presented with a lot of ethereal hors d'oeuvres that are not really going to do it for him unless he camps out next to the table and just loads up on them, which is something that is not looked upon favorably. In fact, like, eating too much, period, is looked upon as being kind of, slovenly, I guess. Rows of long tables had been arranged under the tapestries and garlands, and the tables were piled high with elaborate dishes served on even more elaborate table settings among elaborate flower arrangements and extraordinary ice carvings. On closer examination, Geralt noted there was considerably more elaboration than food. "There's no fair," he stated in a glum voice, smoothing down the short, black, silver-braided, narrow-waisted tunic Yennefer had dressed him in. So I love that he is just absolutely, like, he has been dressed for this occasion in something that is not his, and kind of shuffled in here with no real, like, warning of what this is going to be like. There's no music. It's drafty as hell. There's nowhere to sit down. Are we going to eat and drink standing up? Indeed, we shall be eating standing up. You should also know that stopping too long by the food table is considered an indiscretion. Drinking in an unrestrained way is also considered a breach of etiquette. Avoiding conversations is considered an inexcusable indiscretion. We are supposed to be circulating around the hall, greeting people, paying them compliments, engaging in conversation. And so they begin their rounds, and he starts to realize that, you know, he's a witcher and is looked down upon in general by most people because of being a mutant, being a total weirdo. Like, people rely on him to do what they need to get done. But that doesn't mean that they like it. And it certainly doesn't mean that they respect him, really. And he has she has sort of invited him to events like this in the past. And he has expressed concern that he would not be welcome, that he would be treated at the very least as an outsider, but perhaps even worse, as just like a freak, basically. And the fact that Yennefer really never put up an argument or like said, no, they'd never do that, and just let him decline. For him, he took that as confirmation. He was just like, okay, yeah, that she is inviting me because she would like me to come, but she's also aware that there are risks, and what I'm saying is definitely a possibility. So he's a little surprised at the way he is greeted when he comes in. So Geralt was ravenously hungry, but quickly realized Yennefer hadn't been joking. It became clear that the etiquette observed by mages did indeed demand that one eat and drink very little, and do it with a nonchalant air. To cap it all, every stop at the food table carried with it social obligations. Someone would notice you and express their joy at the fact, and then approach and offer their greetings, which were as effusive as they were disingenuous. After the compulsory air kisses or unpleasantly weak handshakes, after the insincere smiles and even less sincere, although well-concocted compliments, followed a brief and tediously banal conversation about nothing. Now listen, guys, this is one of those infuriating things that I know I have some privilege here, but I also get really mad about personally. I cannot tell you all how much I hate small talk. I despise it. I loathe it. Like, it's, for me, the purest form of torture. And yet, I am extremely good at it. I am stupid good at it. It's what's made me good at customer service. It's part of what makes me good at podcasting in a way. And I have always wound up, wherever I have worked, being put in the position where I'm the one who deals with people because I'm really good at dealing with people, even though I find most people insufferable. Like, I get a lot of credit from folks in life for being an empathetic and compassionate person. And I find it kind of funny because I am empathetic. I am compassionate. I have a lot I manage to put myself in people's shoes pretty easily and think through what they're probably going through. But there's another side to that for me where I also am very contemptuous of a lot of people and make very dramatic judgment calls about people based on small, petty things, and genuinely will like decide that somebody isn't worth the time on a pretty like offhand comment that they've made. So for me, small talk is really tough because I am very good at pretending to be getting along with a person enough, even when I don't like them at all. That almost every time, and Owen commented about this the other day, people that I genuinely just dislike love me. And I think part of it is because when I have small talk with people I dislike, I manage to make it innocuous enough that when I have an edge to my voice, it comes across as simply being a joke or humor. Like that edge is coming from sarcasm rather than frustration with that person. I camouflage it well enough. So I feel like I would do super well, weirdly, in this sort of setting, as much as it sounds literally like hell to me. But there's something about certain types of people. This situation I would do well in that we all know we're playing this game. But when it comes to like real life, a lot of the people that I have met in this sort of context that I have not liked, part of what I haven't liked about them is that they seem to be weak and like just of low character and making jokes that I find really like tasteless, outright offensive sometimes, or that they seem to be people who are unknowingly betraying some deep selfishness and shittiness in pretty ordinary conversation, but I feel like it's obvious to all of us what they're actually saying. And my contempt will come through just enough that it seems like it makes people like that want me to like them. Like they can tell that I'm hard to please. For some reason, they admire me or admire that, and they want me to like them. And so they start to sort of follow me around and continue to like engage with me because they're trying to get my approval. It's like a weird Regina George sort of situation where the fact that somebody is being shitty and clearly doesn't respect or like you makes you want their approval even more somehow. And in a situation like this, where I don't feel like these people are desperate for that kind of approval, I'm not sure if that would work the same way as it tends to in regular conversation. But I really felt for Geralt in this because I just, as much as I can make use of my skills in these sorts of settings, I do find it really gross, you know? And he, not only is he realizing that like this is all going to be just a totally different situation than what he expected, but they are just totally not hiding the fact that they're all really curious about him. And there's even like some tingles that like the twitching of his amulet that he wears that indicates that there are people out here just straight up like trying to use magic on him and stuff. He says, although Yennefer had assured him that propriety and tact forbade the use of magic at this kind of event, he didn't believe the mages were capable of restraining themselves, particularly since Yennefer was provocatively thrusting him into the limelight. And he was right not to believe. He felt his medallion vibrating several times, and the pricking of magical impulses. Some sorcerers, or more precisely some enchantresses, brazenly tried to read his thoughts, which I really want to know what that feels like how he can tell that's what's happening. He was prepared for that, knew what was happening, and knew how to respond. He looked at Yennefer walking alongside him, at white and black and diamond Yennefer, with her raven hair and violet eyes, and the sorcerers trying to sound him out became unsettled and disorientated. Confronted with his blissful satisfaction, they were clearly losing their composure and poise. And so there's like this monologue that he's doing, just thinking about how happy he is to be with her, how beautiful he finds her, how elated he is that she is his and belongs to him, and that he's here with her, and that she has no eyes for anyone else, and he has no eyes for anyone else. And she takes him aside and accuses him of being ostentatious, which this section of the story that takes place just in this party, the word ostentatious is used like 12 times. But she accuses him of being ostentatious, and he's like, I wasn't being ostentatious. I was being sincere. But you guys are just so unused to anybody meaning what they say that when somebody is very sincere, you see it as ostentatious when it's not. And there's just like a couple of different moments like that where people accuse him of either being like making himself seem weak because of his sincerity, or at the very least, almost like he's supposed to try harder to fit in, and that he has to be aware that being sincere sets him apart, and almost accusing him of being like impolite because he's not trying harder, to be snobbish and withdrawn, not even withdrawn, aloof. That's the word I want, and snide and what have you. So anyway, and he, like, all of the seafood, he says something about how, like, it's probably been sitting here for 10 days. Like, aren't you worried about getting sick? And she says, oh no, these were teleported here. They just caught these. And I was like, that is so rad. I have always said that if I could be any sort of superhero or have any sort of superpower, I would pick teleportation, because just think how fucking, like, great it would be that oh shit, I'm at work, but I forgot something at home. Boom, grabbed it. I would really love to go to this restaurant for my birthday, but it's it's like 2 states over, and it'd be such a pain. Boop, I can go. Just, or you could use it for more nefarious purposes where you're like, I really need money for my back surgery, and you just teleport yourself right into a bank vault and take that money. Not that I think that would really work out for you, but so he tells her as they get to this table, she says that she wants him to pass her some crabs, and he just picks them up and starts to hand them, and then just says, I love you, Yen. And she, like, stops and is just like, what? And then says, that's the first time you ever said that. And he doesn't believe it. And she's like, no, I promise you, it's the first time you've ever said it out loud. You've thought it, but I didn't want to be impolite and respond when it was something that you had only thought, but for some reason had decided not to say. So I didn't acknowledge it, but I for sure have been waiting for you to actually say it, and you never have. So I'm definitely aware that this is the first time. And she says it back to him as well, which also makes him choke. It's so funny. Like, they both are aware that they love each other. They both feel this way. And yet they are both so thrown at the other just coming out and saying it finally. So, yeah. He asks if he can kiss her. And she says no. And then they get interrupted by Sabrina. And I love the way that this is described. The enchantresses, let's see, Sabrina, said Yennefer, displaying such genuine joy that anyone apart from Geralt might have been deceived. They embraced gingerly, kissed each other. The 2 enchantresses' earrings, resembling miniature bunches of grapes, were identical, but the whiff of fierce hostility immediately floated in the air. So I am not sure about this, but are their earrings matching because they went to the same school? Is that because she introduces Sabrina as this is a school friend of mine, and later on, Sabrina says something about how she introduced me as an old school friend, but she didn't. She simply said this is a school friend. So Sabrina is like taking offense at some things that she just straight up invented, or she's pretending to take offense. I don't know, but yeah. So yeah, here we go. This is the part where we have the ostentatious being used a couple of times. Sabrina Gelvesig raised her head, her earrings shaking and jingling, gently, but ostentatiously and impudently. I agree, replied Yennefer nonchalantly, narrowing her eyes a little and ostentatiously tossing her hair back from her own earrings. It just comes up quite a few moments. And we get the description of her very elaborate and revealing outfit. Her crimson skirt, gathered in by a silver belt with a large rose-shaped buckle, was split up the side in keeping with the latest fashion. Fashion demanded it be split halfway up the thigh, but Sabrina wore hers to split halfway up her hip, and a very nice hip at that. And they continue talking. Yennefer straight up asks her what the news is in Cadwyn, what's going on with King Henselt, says, is he still wasting energy and resources chasing the squirrels through the forests, yada, yada, yada. And Sabrina says, let's give politics a rest. Tomorrow at the council, we'll be politicking until it comes out of our ears, and we'll hear plenty of moralizing, too. About the need for peaceful coexistence, about friendship, about the necessity to adopt a loyal position regarding the plans and ambition of our kings. And she says all of this in a way, and later on, there's a moment where Triss says something when Yennefer says, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Triss says, tomorrow? And like smiles in this weird way. And I'm like wondering whether or not Yennefer is like being set up to miss this meeting or something. There's something about everybody specifically saying tomorrow that makes me think that there's like a trick happening, and the way that Triss reacted. But I might just be reading into that. Because the Sabrina here, indeed, let's wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow, everything will become clear tomorrow. You know, like that feels real suspicious to me. So Yennefer manages to like pretend that somebody else is calling to her and get out of this conversation. And there's this whole like weird interaction where Sabrina intimates that Yennefer needs like wrinkle cream, and Yennefer notices that she's like kind of thrusting her chest out in order to get Geralt's attention. Like she's really trying it on here. Sabrina smiled at the Witcher and joyously thrust out everything the black chiffon wasn't hiding. Geralt swallowed again, trying not to look too blatantly at her pink nipples, only too visible beneath the transparent material. He glanced timidly at Yennefer. The enchantress smiled, but he knew her too well. She was incandescent. So yeah, she real mad, and they all separate finally, and then we run into Philippa, who is accompanied by Dijkstra. And there's this line that says that, like, maybe because Dijkstra is, like, the one person, Philippa is the one person that he knows, that he should have been glad to see her, but he isn't. Or maybe it's Dijkstra, because it says that he knows the spy, and I don't know where he knows Dijkstra from. I don't remember this connection at all. I'm delighted to see you again, Your Excellency. It is a joy for me to see you again, Yennefer, replied the chief of King Visimir's secret service. So, okay, Visimir. Which king is that? I am just having so much trouble remembering this stuff. I'm like, and because there are so many of them, and I don't, like, we've met them a couple times. The only one that I, like, remembered was the one who had been torturing people and really, like, kind of over cruel. But then it felt like he was doing that as not because he, like, enjoyed it or was sadistic, but because he had a firmer grasp of exactly what was at stake than other people. I don't feel like that was Visimir. I feel like that king had, his name started with an E, but I am not remembering. It's a joy for me to see you, Geralt. My respect comes from the bottom of my heart. Geralt, refraining from telling Dijkstra his respect came from the heart of his bottom. What a joke. What is that? That's literally like, I feel like that's a Jim Carrey joke or something. Like, that's literally a line from something. It felt so out of place here. But I noticed you talking to Sabrina, says Philippa. That's right. Have you seen what she's wearing? Ugh, the revolting cow. Did she try to question you? Everyone knows she spies for Henselt of Cadwyn. You don't say, said Yennefer, faking astonishment, which was rightly considered an excellent joke. Are you enjoying our celebration? she asked. Extraordinarily, said King Visimir's spy, giving a courtly bow. If we presume, said Philippa, smiling, that the Count is here on business, such an assurance is extremely complimentary, and like every similar compliment, not very sincere. Only a moment ago, he confessed he'd prefer nice, murky atmosphere to the stink of flaming brands and scorched meat on a spit. He also misses a traditional table swimming in spilt sauce and beer, which he could bang with his beer mug to the rhythm of a few filthy drunken songs, and which he could gracefully slide under in the early hours to fall asleep among hounds gnawing bones. So he has a similar feeling, apparently, to Geralt in some ways. And he remains deaf to my arguments extolling the superiority of our way of banqueting. And Geralt's like, really? What's that about? Oh, you don't understand anything. How can you show off your dress or your figure if you're hiding behind a table in gloom and smoke? So that's clearly like the whole vibe is to be seen, right? Which is what I assumed when I saw how this was all set up, and the fact that there's not that much food. I mean, at one point they are out. I think it's Philippa. They are out of caviar, and Philippa conjures some, and she mentions that it's like gives you the same exact sensation as actually eating it, even though it's not real. So it's not fattening at all. Which, guys, can you just imagine what that would be like? To have a complete, indulgence that had no consequences at all, but also the same amount of satisfaction as the real thing? I mean, I can't believe that has not been brought up yet. I would 100% be like, I just can't. That would be so great. That'd be so great. You could just eat whatever you wanted, anytime you wanted. You could completely overdo it, and it wouldn't matter at all. What? And one could argue, okay, sure, your stomach isn't getting full, so maybe it's not going to feel satisfying. But I don't eat because I'm hungry a lot of the time. I eat because I want the experience of eating. And he sort of asks her, why would you bother with eating at all, like the act of it, if you could just make the flavor appear in your mouth? And she's like, well, because the ritual of it, the action of eating is half of the fun, more than half, which I completely agree with. And then she says something about how she could also summon an orgasm, like the sensation of it. And he gets all thrown and is really just uncomfortable with it in a way that's just so precious, because I just love the fact that he is wrong-footed so much of the time here. So I'm running out of time here. I gotta hurry up. There's the sort of interaction between Yennefer and Triss that is, it feels like Triss is inferring, because Yennefer has not confessed to Geralt yet that she is on the council, that it must mean Yennefer isn't really interested in being with him, or that they haven't been in as much contact as Triss thought they were. So Yennefer has to make a really obvious oh yes, talking is way far down the list, and stares at the Witcher in this way to make Triss really uncomfortable and to hammer it home, bitch, yes, we're fucking, don't try anything. And he gets annoyed and sort of pulls Yennefer aside. And Yennefer is like, I don't know if you thought I didn't know about the two of you, but I'm not an idiot. And she was just sort of pressing, and she needed to be let know with no uncertain terms that this is not going to happen. It's over. We can stop talking about it. I made my point. We're done. But don't try and tell me that I didn't have to say anything, because yes, I did. I know her. And I kind of get that. Triss is careful. It's just interesting to see her when she's as assured as she often is next to Yennefer, who is in so much more control of the situation than Triss is. how much Triss seems like a child in comparison, you know? So, let's see. He talks to Dijkstra, who is trying to, like, get some information out of him, get him to take sides, get him to make a wager where if something happens, then the entire conversation that Geralt has, he will be, like, required to tell Dijkstra all about it. Nobody is, like, being subtle at all, even though they all kind of seem to think they are. It's all very obvious. And he, for his part, is not agreeing to anything. He doesn't want to be on anybody's side, and he says it so many times, and nobody is interested in hearing it. So then we have the women who are all drooling over Geralt, and all of these, like, little interactions that feel really, like, petty and silly about what people are wearing, that they have, like, the fur or skin of animals that are endangered or otherwise, like, actually extinct. All of this stuff. And let's see. I'm trying to jump ahead to the part where he is hanging out with Yennefer. Okay, so yeah. He and Yennefer go back to the inn, I think, that they're staying in. And she is like, they have sex, and she's laying there, and it feels to him playing some sort of game where she's like, saying something about how it's been so long since I had sex with anybody, and doing it in such a way, like the attitude of it makes him feel like she's fishing for something. And he doesn't really respond to it or answer it. And I'm still not entirely sure what it was that he thought she was fishing for, or what she could have been with that kind of statement. Is she trying to, like, get him to say also that he hasn't had sex in a long time? Is she worried that he was with somebody since her when she hasn't been with anybody since him? Is that all it is? Because that might be all it is. There's, like, times where I assign the meaning of being subtle to her to be political, when maybe it's just personal. Maybe it's just her being, like, a little bit insecure sometimes. So she asks him about the conversation with Vilgefortz, and it's a description of him being introduced to everybody and observing all of the people. He had commented earlier about how the council is a lot smaller than he thought it was going to be. And let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Sorry, guys. The blue elven eyes of Francesca Findenbear were as inscrutable and hard as glass. The Daisy of the Valleys smiled when he was introduced to her. That smile, although incredibly beautiful, filled the Witcher with dread. During the introductions of Tissia de Vry, although apparently preoccupied with her sleeve and jewelry, which seemed to require endless straightening, she smiled at him considerably less beautifully, but with considerably more sincerity. And it was Tissia who immediately struck up a conversation with him, referring to one of his noble Witcher deeds, which he incidentally could not recall and suspected she had invented. Which I really love, the idea that somebody would just make up some shit that you did to your face to try and compliment you and think that you're not going to know that they invented it. Is he supposed to not know, or is he supposed to just go along with it? So eventually he tells her about Vilgefortz, who has this woman who works with him named Lydia, whom Yennefer called a meaningless person, and that making eye contact with her is considered a huge faux pas. Don't look her in the face at all. And she is not allowed to speak. She can't use her voice. And so she will talk to him, to Vilgefortz, telepathically, and Vilgefortz will reply out loud. So apparently Vilgefortz, she said something to him, and he replies to her, "Yes, that's a good idea. Let's take a walk through the Gallery of Glory. You'll have the opportunity to take a look at the history of magic, Geralt of Rivia." So there are a lot of paintings of different instances in history that we get described to us. The ship of outcast Jan Brecker bending the power to his will. He calms the waves, proving that magic need not be evil or destructive, but may save many lives. To which the Witcher's like, did this even happen? And he's like, yeah, probably not. But, it's a good legend. And then the identification of the chosen ones. Becker and Giambattista put the children of the settlers through magical tests to reveal sources. The selected children were taken from their parents and brought to Mirth, the first seat of the mages. Right now, you are looking at a historical moment. As you can see, all the children are terrified, and only that determined brown-haired girl is holding a hand out to Giambattista with a completely trusting smile. She became the famous Agnes of Glanville, the first woman to become an enchantress. The person behind her is her mother. You can see the sadness in her expression. So we get, like, all of this continues on, all of these, like, moments of signing a pact of peace and battles and yada, yada, yada. And at one point, the Witcher says, because there's a painting from monks sailing to Lochmune to persuade the elves there to adopt a group of source children. Who were to be taught by elven sorcerers. It may interest you to know that amongst those children was a little boy who came to be known as Gerhardt of Ale. You met him a moment ago. That little boy is now called Hen Gedemith. Gemedith. I hope I'm getting that right. And the Witcher says this is calling out for a battle scene. After all, several years after Monk's successful expedition, the forces of Marshal Rapanek of Tretogor carried out a pogrom in Lochmune and Est Hamlet, killing all of the elves regardless of age or sex. And a war began, ending with a massacre at Sherewed. And Vilgefortz is like, yes, all of that's true, but no sorcerers were involved in that at all, hence us not having a painting of that. Basically, Geralt's trying to be like, oh, you're painting this moment of history that seems really, like, lovely and noble, but actually wound up in the fucking annihilation of, like, huge groups of people. And this dude is like, yeah, it did. Not our fault. I don't know what you're trying to say. And it's just like, there's just some tension there, I'd also like to point out, though, that all of these names and all of these places being thrown out here without context is, again, really tough. And I wish so much that this writer wouldn't do this all the time, because it can get so overwhelming, and it just serves to confuse, because I feel like I don't know what's going to come up later, and I don't know if this is going to be relevant. So I try to remember it. I try to put all of this away somewhere. And I put too much away that turns out to be irrelevant or not relevant until so far later that it's explained to me again by then anyway. And then there are things that I should have remembered that I didn't. It's just, there's too much. It's not focused enough. And this is the second book in the series. So if I weren't coming at this knowing which book this is, I would assume that there were 10 books before this that explained all of this stuff that I'm simply not aware of, that there's all kinds of, like, source material. And there's a difference between making it feel like there's a richer world out there, like, something that Tolkien does, or even, like, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, for example, has, like, a lot of footnotes and things that sort of let you know that there is a huge magical community that we don't actually ever meet, but that exists, that is studying, that is doing whatever. But I don't need to know the specifics, and it just tells me as a bit of entertainment and then moves on. There are ways of doing this sort of thing that I feel like are much more effective without being quite so confusing and so overwhelming. And so this is the part where I just start to get really, really lost, because we have all of these moments in history, again, that I don't know how much of this I'm supposed to retain or really pay attention to. So then we get to this part of, and I'm jumping ahead here because I do not get it to such a degree that I am tempted to go back over all of this other stuff, but I don't have time, and I actually am not totally sure that this is relevant. So first we have the martyrdom of Sorcerer Radmir flayed alive during the Falka Rebellion. And I'm wondering about the chronology. I know how elixirs of youth work, but the simultaneous appearance of living people and long dead ones in these paintings. You mean you are astonished that you met Hen Gidemuth and Tisea de Vries at the banquet, but Becker, Agnes of Glanville, etc. are not with us. And he says, no, I know that you're not immortal. And Vilgefortz asks him, what is death to you? And Geralt's like, what do you mean? I mean, it's the end. And he's like, of what? And they have this conversation about, it's a combination of how sort of foolish it is for human beings to try and understand the purpose of life, but also how foolish it is for people who don't live as long. Like, we sorcerers don't waste time puzzling out what nature is. We know what it is, for we are nature ourselves. Have you ever wondered what happened when Becker forced the water to gush from the rock? Becker tamed the power. He forced it to be obedient. He subdued nature. And then he asks, what is your relationship to women? And asks Geralt whether or not a woman can be made to be obedient and controlled if she is somebody, and he says like the average woman, not just the female of the species. Can a real woman be controlled, overcome, made to surrender to your will? And if so, how? And Yennefer asks, did you answer? And he says, yes, I did. And he says, she asks, how did you answer? And he says, you surely know. And then we just jump back into the conversation where Vilgefortz says, you've understood and probably always understood, and thus you will also understand that if the concept of will and submission, of commands and obedience, and of male ruler and servant woman will perish and disappear, then unity will be achieved. It feels like he thinks that he made a point. I don't know what that point is at all. Like, I think he is trying to compare women to nature, and the fact that, like, they were able to overpower nature and make it bend to their wills, but that he's also saying that you cannot do that with women, and that if we are to, he says, if unity is achieved, all will be as one, and death would lose its meaning. I have no idea what he's fucking talking about. If women are not subjected to being, like, for obedience to be expected of them, we will, like, death won't mean it. What is, I am lost. So then we have Lydia, who, like, Geralt, he points out this other painting, because apparently Lydia painted this one, is the way that he says it. He says, Lydia thanks you for your acknowledgement, and I congratulate you on your taste. The landscape depicts the meeting between Krennigan of Lod and Lara Jon Epshidal, the legendary lovers torn apart and destroyed by the Time of Contempt. He was a sorcerer, and she was an elf, one of the elite. What might have been the beginning of reconciliation was transformed into tragedy. And when Geralt says, I've heard that as like a fairy tale, but if it actually happened, then what really happened? And he replies, almost nobody knows. Lydia, hang up your picture over there and let Geralt have a look. It's a portrait of Lara Doran Epshidal taken from an ancient miniature. Congratulations, said the Witcher, bowing to Lydia van Bridvoort, finding it hard to keep his voice from quavering. It's a true masterpiece. His tone didn't quaver, even though Lara Doran Epshidal looked at him from the portrait with Ciri's eyes. What? I don't understand what happened here. Like, I feel like this guy is making a point to him that I know you've got Ciri, or you know what's going on with Ciri. And that becomes a lot more obvious later when the guy just basically comes out and says it. But I don't understand what... I just don't understand the significance of any of this. I really, I've read this twice now, and I just don't get it. And so later on, they have this conversation where they've walked out onto a sort of like a balcony area, and this dude, like with a wave of his hand, shows Geralt that there was almost nothing really there, that it's all been put together as an illusion. Rather than investing a ton of money into actually repairing a ruin, they have just made it so that you can walk on it and actually like use it the way that it was intended. But underneath, it's like falling apart. And so you have to be really careful where you step, or else you could fall right through, because the illusion is very convincing, but it doesn't change the functionality. And he does this by like sending away the illusion and almost making Geralt fall to his death. Like if Geralt had not been a Witcher with excellent balance, he would have fallen. And this sorcerer says to him, "So you do fear death after all?" Which, did he ever say that he doesn't fear death? Like, I don't understand the point he's trying to make. And he asks Geralt later, why did you even become a Witcher? Didn't you ever consider becoming a sorcerer? And at first, Geralt is really puzzled by this line of questioning. And then he realizes that this dude has like looked into his history and his family tree and found out that Geralt's mother was a sorceress, or at least had like some magic. And that this could have been because of like genetics supposedly handing down magic, that probably being a sorcerer was something that Geralt could have done. And he sort of wants to know why he didn't. But there's like a weird aggressiveness to him wanting to know. Like he almost takes it personally that Geralt didn't do it. And then he tells a story about how he was a foundling and how he was brought to the Druids and like got involved with an enchantress whom he was in love with, but also hated because she just completely dominated him, and that he eventually left her and then felt empty because all of the emotion that he had toward her when she was no longer in his life was not there, and left him feeling sort of nothing. So he says, like, basically Geralt interrupts and is like, what is your point? Are you trying to get me to see that you were a foundling with no family that you knew of, and that like I could have been a sorcerer just like you became a sorcerer? And this guy is like, no, I mean, you know that already. But people have all kinds of paths. And the Witcher is like, well, yeah, and my father, like, I clearly take after him a lot more than anybody. He finally, like, gets to the point and it's just basically like, you need to make a choice. We know that you've got Ciri. She is going to get hurt, and we will be the ones to hurt her, or somebody will, unless you decide where you stand on all of this and accept our help, and we can help protect her, or we will use her against her because we are fighting a war just as much as anybody. It is a weird conversation that feels really circular to me. Why do you want me in your pot? What is it in this cauldron which is starting to boil? What is in the air? And he says, quite a nasty scrap is brewing. A bloody fight for life or death with no mercy shown. One side will triumph and the other will be pecked apart. I put it to you to join the side with the better chance. Join us, forget the others. What is the point of perishing with them? Be sensible and join the right side when the time comes to choose, and it will come. And the Witcher, again, is just like, dude, I adapt to what happens. I don't take sides. This isn't the thing. I have never been like this. Witchers are just not like this. No. And this is when he, like, directly threatens Ciri. I offered you the option to prevent that. You have the whole night. Go and think it over. When he tells this to Yennefer, she's basically just like, whatever. He's full of shit. He's just trying to scare you. He's trying to trick you. And apparently he managed it a little bit, but it doesn't matter. Nothing he said is actually important. He is just trying to play you. You need to trust me. that I know she's okay and safe and will be okay and safe. And he says that he trusts her, which she like acknowledges is actually a pretty big deal for him to say that. And then she says, again, don't worry, tomorrow will explain many matters and solve many problems. Tomorrow, he thought, she's hiding something from me, and I'm afraid to ask what. Conjurer was right. I've got mixed up in a dreadful mess, but now there's no way out. So he asks her about being at Aretusa as a student herself and what it was like. Did she have any dolls? And she reacts really weirdly and is just like, nope, we are not talking about that. Please don't even ask me about that. And I really don't know why. Like, her reaction to him questioning her about this makes me worry about Siri being there. But she cuts him off. They have sex another couple of times. There's a lot of euphemism happening here. And at one point, Yennefer is in his head, and he knows she is, so he's trying to think of pleasant things to make her happy, and accidentally thinks about how he would kind of like a home with her. And she sort of like spins a tale of what life could be like if they were just ordinary people. That is obviously something that he kind of wants. And she does it lightheartedly without really thinking about how much he seems to really want this and that her joking about it isn't really fair. And she realizes after and just sort of apologizes. And when he tries to have more conversation with her about what's going on with them and that he's worried about losing her and that she's like, he can tell she's hiding something, she just kind of is like, how about we just have sex again? So every time that there's any danger of them getting into intimate conversation or trusting one another in that way, there is a complete side tangent into sex. And then finally, they finish having sex the third time, and somebody yells at them, can they finally please shut up? And another person starts applauding. And the Witcher is sort of thinking, I think, that she did this on purpose, that maybe like she thinks her friends are around and they need to know that she's like banging him. I think it's just, I don't know if that's what's going on or not, but I feel like that's what he thinks, that it was all part of like more, not illusion, because it was really happening, but just posturing, But that's part of who she is, so he sort of needs to accept that. And then we get a little bit at the end here, one of those little like bits of history that's at the end of each of the chapters about the Lara portal, which what's-his-face had mentioned earlier and said that they closed up, I think. Located on the Isle of Thened on the uppermost floor of the Tower of Gulls, a fixed portal, periodically active. Destination unknown, but probably skewed owing to damage. A chaotic and lethally dangerous portal. All experimentation categorically forbidden. Magic may not be used in the Tower of Gulls or close proximity to it, particularly not teleportation magic. So, yeah, this is really interesting because they were talking about it earlier, and I don't know what the relevance is, but this is the thing I'm talking about, though. It turns out their offhand mention of the Tower of Gulls and the portal, it turns out that it did mean something. But I didn't pay enough attention the first time to that because I was paying attention to 1,000 other things that it doesn't seem like are actually important. And so I had to go back and like reread that section. So yeah, I'm just like, guys, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I don't know if it's just me. I don't know how other people have felt when they've been reading these or what. But I would really like some input. I want to hear from y'all what it was like for you. And if you were as confused as me, I feel like an idiot at times, and I don't know what to do with the information. Like, I feel like I'm not making heads or tails of things. There's whole conversations with subtext that I'm not getting. I don't know. So help me out. I got to wrap this up. I'm sorry that it ended with me just being frustrated, but I'm trying to be honest about where I'm at. and hopefully you guys can help me. So I will see you all again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.